Hello and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope that you're all doing well and thank you as always for being here. It's great to have you along for another F1 podcast. This time we are previewing the Singapore Grand Prix. And joining me on this episode we have the DNF1 panel of Courtney Pine and Lee Wallington. So Courtney, let's come to you first, sporting the West Ham United jersey, of course, on this episode. So plenty of Hammers fans tuning into this episode. Like and subscribe to the channel, of course, if you want to. There's no better reason to do it than to support your boy in the middle there. But how are you doing, mate? All good?
Yeah, I had a great weekend. I've thoroughly enjoyed watching and listening to the last night at the proms. Got all the good British songs, Rule Britannia, Land of Hope and Glory, God Save the King. My full British bias was in full force. So yeah, I had a great weekend.
Oh, well, that sounds lovely, doesn't it? I know there was a bit of controversy going around in certain media outlets over a few flags doing the rounds, but we're not going to get into that because we are not a political podcast. We are very much an F1 podcast. So let's stick to the F1, shall we? Lee, how are you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm looking forward to this race this weekend and see how the new layout works.
Not a Songs of Praise fan? No, fair enough.
Really
Can't say it's something that I've been too privy to, but I mean, you're always aware of it. British people, it's just one of those things that just goes on and on and on, and you always forget it's there, unless, of course, you're into that stuff. And if you are, that's absolutely fine. But we are into F1, and this weekend we've got the Singapore Grand Prix. Now, of course, history has been made at this point. Max Verstappen winning 10 consecutive Grand Prix races in a row. Red Bull, of course, winning 15 consecutive races in a row. Whilst they will want to add to those records as the season goes on, the ever-present question that is getting more and more dominant in the mouths and minds of everybody that is following this story is, will they be able to go the whole season unbeaten? Will they be able to win every remaining race? And the way things are going right now, the way Max Verstappen in particular is driving, there's absolutely no reason why you can't back him to pull that off. So, Lee, we've had a few more races now since the last asked this question. We are getting closer to the season end, but as we get closer to the season end and Max racks up more of these wins week after week, does it get to a point where you start to want to see Red Bull, not necessarily particularly them, but a team go the whole season winning every race just to witness a moment of history? Or would you much rather see someone eventually break that duck this season?
I mean, it's something I've asked myself personally about what I would prefer, but it is a tour. I am torn between two answers. As you said, witnessing the history, if Red Bull can achieve it, and being, hang on, this is history. I've just seen this. It's very unlikely this will ever be repeated in the short term, let alone the long term, that a team wins every race. You think McLaren winning 15 out of 16 in 88, and we're well over 30 years before there's even talking about it again. So that's really something to really be proud about if that happened. But from a sporting perspective, having multiple teams winning in a season would make it interesting, especially with how Max is in imperious form. So it is really torn about which way I'm leaning. I'm going to be the not very friendly answer here and be I'm stick on the fence and wait and see what happens.
Yeah, you are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place for this one because obviously, it's much easier in other sports when everybody's very tribal towards their own team and they don't really want to see anyone else be successful except for themselves, and that's absolutely understandable. There is an element of that, of course, with Formula One. I know there are a lot of fans that support specific drivers and some support specific teams, and if I presented this question to them, I'd imagine a lot of people would probably say to me, no, they wouldn't want to see Max Verstappen or Perez or Red Bull win another race again this season. They want to see other people win races. They don't want to see them go to the end of the season having won every single race. That being said, I'm the same as you, mate. Part of me was like, oh, would it be great for F1 to see one team go and win every single race this season? Probably not in terms of a competitive sporting perspective. But when you get closer and closer to the end of the season, and Red Bull and Max Verstappen and Perez, of course, they pick up more and more wins and get closer to that perfect record, there is a part of me that wants to see it happen because I can't really see any value in any other team really winning a race, unless it's absolutely crazy, but it's in isolation. You want to see that achievement. So I'm like you. I'm a little bit on the fence, as unpopular as it sounds, but I feel like the closer and closer we get to it, part of me is like, do you know what? I wouldn't mind actually seeing it just for the sake of witnessing history in that regard. Courtney, dare I come your way with this one? If we took the Max Verstappen Red Bull element out of it, would that sweeten your incentive to back this, or would you much rather see someone else win rather than seeing one team win the whole season?
If it was Lewis Hamilton, I'd be all for it. Right, I'm gonna stop. But no,
I'm not surprised, to be fair. I mean, if it was Ferrari, I would be exactly the same. To be honest, I wouldn't care. But there is that team element. But if you strip that all away, then what would your thoughts be on that?
No, I'm gonna stop winding up the usual suspects in the comments. Back to the show. I don't, and I do have my own personal reason for it, and not for a reason that people could guess. It's because I don't want to see my favourite all-time car, the MP44's records, be... I know even if Red Bull were to continue that form, they'll still be seen as the better car, but for the MP44, for that record to be beaten, even if Red Bull were to lose one race, it'd be matched. I'd obviously like to see Red Bull lose 2 or more races, then the MP44 stays at the very top, because I think we'll have our own reasons for loving that car and that era. So for me, I don't want to see that get beaten. So long live the MP44's record. That's what I say.
Fair enough. Of course, Red Bull have gone past a consecutive number of race wins, but as you pointed out rightly, that they only lost once that season, and ironically, that was at the Italian Grand Prix, I think, that season. So yeah, obviously Red Bull managing to break the Monza curse, Max in particular breaking that Monza curse as well. So it's very much on, and I think this is one of the stories that the longer it goes this season, the more interesting it will become. But speaking of which, of course, there was a big piece of news that went through the media. We did talk about this briefly in the last episode when I had the Ferrari chat with Sam Cooper. Of course, if you haven't checked that out, make sure to check that one out on your favourite podcasting platform. It was an audio-only one, so it won't be on YouTube. But the FIA, they came back with the findings and the results from the cost cap audit in 2022. And wonderfully, all 10 teams were found to be compliant with the cost cap measures and, of course, staying within the cost cap budget, which I think is very, very good news overall. I know some people probably would have been banking on 1 or 2 teams in particular. You can make your own minds up who those teams are to have breached those cost cap regulations in order to try and gain an incentive or to explain a performance advantage, if you like. But as it stands, everybody was compliant as far as we are aware, according to the FIA. So that can only be good news in my opinion. I'm kind of glad that we're going into a Singapore Grand Prix weekend like we did last season, but this time we're not going to have the cost cap drama dominating the news or being controversial. You might hear a few people talk about certain things because I'm sure there'll be conversations in the paddock about each team when they find out how close they were to the limit. Could they have spent their money better? Could they have spent a little bit more money? Have other teams found loopholes or ways to not necessarily cheat the system, but find ways to gain an extra advantage that other teams hadn't necessarily thought of and might encourage others to push the limits? So I'm sure there's going to be that going around, but what do you guys reckon? Are you happy to see that all 10 teams are compliant, or would you have liked to have seen a little bit of controversy as we got last season?
I think I just get the feeling that Toto Wolff would have had to have made a cheeky trip down to IKEA last week. I reckon he damaged a lot of the tables. I reckon he definitely needed a new coffee table. He would have absolutely hammered that table after finding that Red Bull were compliant. Obviously, I had to bring up the Toto Wolff meme, but I do feel that Toto Wolff would have been probably the main figure. It would have spearheaded, let's say, the hope that Red Bull had breached the cost cap, particularly after they'd done it last year. That very much would have fed a narrative. But I do agree, to an extent, Adam, to this season we'll be able to focus on the final races, because at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. We're here to talk about racing rather than the other controversy that goes around the paddock. So, yeah, for once, we're not going to have it.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I kind of imagine that there must be a table manufacturer or desk manufacturer out there that must try and produce an extra robust and durable table. And I feel like there's an opportunity there to promote Toto Wolff and get him to advertise by smashing the table to pieces and seeing if it actually holds up or if he's not able to smash it. I think that would actually make good advertising. Chucking a couple of no Mikey no phrases in there as well, just for authenticity, if you like. We could get that. We could get a company that makes very robust doors and Gunther Steiner can't smash it. Something like that. But no, you're absolutely right. I think it's good for the sport. That the teams, not necessarily all of the teams, because it was only a couple that breached the cost cap. One in particular that did breach the financial element of the cost cap. It's good to see that all the teams have learnt their lessons. Everything's been clarified. I think the nature of the punishment that we saw last year that was awarded to Red Bull or sanctioned to Red Bull for breaching the cost cap was probably a little bit lighter than some were hoping for, because this was the first real iteration, and of course there were going to be questions, and I'm sure there was a need for leniency a little bit, I suppose, to make sure that we want to make sure everybody's aware of what's going on, and this year I think it's been successful in that no one's breached it, so that's a good thing. Lee, are you glad that this is the last time? Hopefully we'll be talking about the cost cap at least for another year.
Yeah, I agree that I'm glad that all the teams were found to be compliant with the regulations. I do think it's better when we can just focus on the racing, focus on what happens on track. It's a lot more entertaining than some of the bickering that goes on off the track. And I don't mean between the drivers. I mean obviously the backdoor politics. I'm surprised, admittedly, that no one got caught out by that technical directive regarding the extracurricular Formula One activities that obviously aimed at some of the bigger teams, because obviously that was applied retrospectively, which obviously means that obviously no one was abusing it in the first place to obviously not be caught out, which is again is a good thing. But it just means we can focus on the racing, and I think it's really good, at least for this year anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess all that's left to say on that one is, Red Bull fans, if you join me, take a deep breath and relax. You're fine. We can now enjoy the racing. No more controversy, hopefully. Moving on from one controversial incident, potentially, to another one. And this is kind of where we kind of have to, I don't want to say bring the tone down a little bit, but I think we have to get a little bit serious now. And it was regarding some comments that were made by Dr. Helmut Marko regarding Sergio Perez in particular. And long story short, he was making some poorly judged comments relating to Sergio Perez's nationality and his ethnicity being a Mexican. He was saying that Checo has fluctuations because he's South American. His head isn't as focused as Max Verstappen or Sebastian Vettel was by comparison. And I think once again, we've got to this point now with Formula One where I don't think they can just sit idly by anymore and let comments or, interviews like this or things that certain people say, they can't just let it go anymore. Action has to be taken. And Red Bull are no strangers to having to deal with this sort of thing. Of course, they removed Yuri Vips, if we remember, a couple of years ago from their driver program for very, very ill-judged comments that he made on his own live stream, for example. And we're in a situation here now where we've got someone who is very highly thought of and holds a very senior position within the Red Bull racing hierarchy, making these comments about not just any driver, but one of their own drivers. And as I said, the comments himself, I mean, first of all, we talked about this before we went live, guys, and both of you pointed out to me that, first of all, Helmut Marko's geography is a little bit off, because obviously Checo is Mexican, being a North American country, not a South American country. And if we're talking about South Americans not being able to concentrate fully, having fluctuations when it comes to driving at the elite level, well, I think drivers like Nelson Piquet or Ayrton Senna or Juan Manuel Fangio might want to have a word with Helmut Marko over those things, because I think those three drivers in particular knew how to concentrate behind the wheel of an F1 car. So, all sort of jokes aside with that, is it about time now that F1 in particular have to put their foot down on this and actually say, look, enough is enough. We can't tolerate this anymore.
Oh, 100%. It's been a long time coming as well. I think Formula One does have a history of having some outspoken characters with old-fashioned views. I think we've seen it. You go back a few years with Max Mosley, Bernie Ecclestone's probably the most notable. Still trying to keep himself relevant by making remarks to put the 2008 World Championship into doubt, and then to go on to claim that you don't remember saying it. And I feel this goes on to this old rhetoric that they're old school. They're from a different time. They don't mean what they're saying. Um, they're grown ass men, and I feel they need to take responsibility. I'm a big believer in if you truly believe in what you're thinking and what you're saying, you need to take accountability for what you're saying. Just because you're in a position of power and you're wealthy doesn't mean that you should be exempt from getting, as I say, getting into trouble for things that you say. And it's not only, you know, the fact that it's offensive to an entire culture. As you said, Adam, I think it's such an awful way to talk about one of your employees. Like, so if we were to put this into our relative workplaces, say we had managers from a different background, a different culture, and we found out that they were talking publicly about our mindset based on our culture and our backgrounds, we would be offended to say the least. So he needs to take responsibility. I'll be honest. I feel that Helmut Marko, is one of the reasons why Red Bull, in my opinion, are the least popular team on the grid. You want to be getting behind a team that is as successful as Red Bull are. But some of the characters within that team, historically, this isn't just through the Max era, which I think is, it's easy for people to think. I feel there are people within that team that really tarnish the reputation.
Well, we had a statement that Red Bull produced with Dr. Helmut Marko. I'm not going to comment on whether or not these are his own words or not, but I know a lot of people have had their own opinions on this statement about the origin of it, on who produced it. But the statement reads, concerning my remark about Sergio Perez, who service TV Sport and Talk, Monday, September 4th, I would like to apologise for my offensive remark and want to make it absolutely clear that I do not believe that we can generalise about the people from any country, any race or any ethnicity. I was trying to make a point that Checo has fluctuated in his performance this year, but it was wrong to attribute this to his cultural heritage. Now, look, I'm not going to comment on the origins of this quote and this statement. A lot of people already have on social media from what I've seen. But for me, you get to a point where if this was one incident in isolation, then okay, you can kind of deal with this as potentially a learning experience. Maybe a sanction is appropriate, but obviously if it's a one-time thing, then hopefully this person learns for it and they grow and they are better moving forward for it. And that would be great. But this isn't an isolated incident. And this is kind of where I wanted to raise the question of not only should Red Bull, but should F1 now take a no-tolerance policy on this? Because we all hear about the We Race as One program and other diversity measures that F1 introduced and are slowly... They've eroded away for different reasons. They've not exactly stuck to it, perhaps in the manner that some people would have liked, in some people's opinion. But at the same time, when these moments happen, I feel like people call for action and they want things to change. These are the moments where F1 in particular need to step up and say, look, enough is enough. You can't get away with doing this. We need to do something about it. So, Lee, I'm going to put you in an awkward position, so I do apologise. But is it enough for this apology to come from Helmut Marko and then just carry on? Or do you feel that in particular F1 maybe needs to set an example now with someone who's an active member of the F1 paddock, just to basically set a precedent that we are no longer going to take this line down. And if people keep saying these things or acting a certain way to disrespect others, then we're not going to allow it anymore.
I'm probably leaning more towards the side of Formula One should set an example. I'm not saying obviously ban him from Formula One, he has to be fired or anything like that, but they should set a precedent that any racial, well, it wasn't a hatred, but racial slurs isn't acceptable. in the sport, be it within interviews or in backroom conversations between just staff that isn't an interview. It is never acceptable to use that language. And obviously, Formula One has not just new Helmut, but Formula One has had a history of racism in the sport, which isn't acceptable either. So having that example, wherever that example may be, I'm not going to say. Having an example again, it's not acceptable. I think it's something that should be considered. And if they aren't talking about it, they should already be talking to Red Bull management about it. Because obviously, you're not saying Red Bull should be doing something. They're in their own organisation, have their own disciplinary procedures and whatever. That's their internal processes. I'm not going to comment on how Red Bull should do their internal processes, but there should be a conversation about what they could do to set an example that it's not appropriate, because it really isn't, not in today's day and age.
Absolutely. I think that's all we really need to say on that one. It'll be interesting to see what Red Bull do heading into this weekend. It will be interesting to see. It'll be very interesting to see if Dr. Helmut Marko will be present with the team when they go to Mexico in the near future. That will be very interesting because, of course, let's not forget, as we talked about in a previous episode, Mexico is a very lucrative customer of the Red Bull franchise. So I don't think they'd have appreciated those comments being made, not only about a driver, but also extending that to their culture and their country in general.
I think the media aspect of it is a big one. Good timing. Obviously, where I'm wearing my West Ham attire. We've had a very similar issue at our club for many years now with our owner, David Sullivan. He's caused a lot of issues within the club. He's messed up transfers, and it's because he's been so outspoken to the media. There's obviously been discussions higher up at the club, and since then he hasn't been as vocal to the media, and things have improved at the club. The reputation of the club has improved somewhat as well. So I feel that's something that Red Bull, as you both said, I think that's something that Red Bull needs to look at internally. That maybe, just maybe, keep Helmut Marko away from the microphones and the cameras as much as possible.
Yeah, perhaps for now that might be the best idea going forward. Going on to another topic of discussion, of course, there's going to be some changes to the layout this weekend at the Singapore circuit, particularly in the final sector. Just going through some of the changes. The left-handed kink at turn 15, that's going to be straight now, behind the grandstand where it used to run under. And then it will rejoin the original circuit, what was turn 19. So they're going to get rid of that little chicane area as well, and the little grandstand bit where it runs underneath the tunnel in the final sector. The idea is it should lead into the final two left-handers and hopefully create more overtaking opportunities in that part of the circuit, which, of course, I don't think many people need to argue that that's not necessarily a good thing. But I'll be honest, I really enjoyed that section. So I actually am going to miss it. But that should be a different challenge for the drivers. And perhaps some teams who might not have looked forward to going to Singapore with the old final sector, they may find that might turn out to be a benefit for them this weekend instead.
Yeah, I was also going to say one outcome that you haven't mentioned of getting to that sector, or not, that part of the track, is it causes a lot of safety cars. So are we going to see less safety cars now because there's especially that chicane aspect going under the grandstand? It is very easy to lock up and into the barriers you go. So will we see less safety cars as another aspect of this change? If that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's up to you to decide. Not you individually,
yeah.
Adam.
I mean, safety cars do tend to bring change, and change is always a good thing sometimes in certain races. And I think this season, I think many people will agree that safety cars, when they come at the right time, they do tend to fluctuate the pecking order. So obviously creates exciting moments this season. So I certainly wouldn't be amiss to a safety car at the right moment in Singapore. We do tend to get safety cars being very influential in Singapore Grand Prix in the past. So it will be interesting. Courtney, what are your thoughts on the changes to the final sector? Are you happy about them? Potentially they're going to create more overtaking, or would you rather have seen it left alone?
I'm happy to see a change. I do feel that I'm all for safety cars, and not too many. I'm for a safety car here and there, and to give the races a bit more spice. I think we need a bit more of that this season. But at the same time, I do feel that when that was to happen, it looked almost amateurish. Like to have a section of the circuit completely blocked like that, it was, I think it's a bit too much. So I'm glad that they have got rid of it, and anything to encourage overtaking as well, because I do think that Singapore is easily the best street circuit we've seen in Formula One. It stood out to start with when it started in 2008, with it being the first floodlit night race. So it already stands on its own. But I do feel that these changes will help solidify Singapore's status as the best street circuit.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember all the way back to 2008, I think the first time that we went to Singapore, and a night race was such a foreign idea or concept at the time. We'd never had one before, and yet now we're used to like 4 or 5 or something like that every single season now. It's just a regular part of F1. So at the time, it was really exciting. They made it a big thing. The cars looked great under the lights, and we'll be returning again, hopefully, for another classic race. It's always been no stranger to action and controversy in equal measure, so hopefully it will deliver another exciting race this weekend. Speaking of controversy and, of course, interest in the media at the moment, there's been some rumours going around regarding the potential futures of Zhou Guanyu and Logan Sargent, the only 2 drivers currently with permanent seats at this moment in time that are not tied down to a new contract for 2024 after the news of Hamilton and Russell confirming their medium-term future with Mercedes, at least for the next couple of years. Is this going to create the possibility for some added pressure on those two? Because of late, I think it's fair to say Zhou Guanyu has not exactly been setting any headlines at Alfa Romeo. Not that Alfa Romeo have been setting many headlines themselves, so it's totally understandable. But he's just been going about his business and probably doing what's required. And then, of course, there's Logan Sargent, who, with Williams' progress, has made some progress himself, but has not necessarily been able to be anywhere near his teammate Alex Albon, who has been an absolute revelation this season, and one of the drivers of the season as well, to boot. So I wonder if there'll be some pressure there. What are your thoughts regarding those 2 drivers in particular?
For me, I think Joe has done enough to be given another season. As you already said, Alfa Romeo haven't been doing amazing this season. It's obviously Valtteri. He's there or thereabouts with Valtteri. So you can use your teammate as comparison. He's done enough. They got the big change in a couple of years. Why rock the boat with a teammate change when it's all about transitioning to Audi? When he's doing obviously a satisfactory job. But with Sargent, Alex is doing a stupendous job. He's up there. He's doing amazing qualifying laps. He's getting some great race results. And Logan isn't. And that is implying the pressure, especially as there's probably other drivers circling for that seat, trying to position themselves to get it. And I think the pressure is just going to be mounting on Alex, unfortunately.
Yeah, maybe so. With Zhou Guanyu, of course, the Audi element is quite a factor because, of course, that is going to be increasing over the next few years. There have been rumours in the press that Audi would like to move someone else in, that they're a little bit more akin to having when they eventually establish themselves in F1 sooner rather than later. How does Zhou Guanyu deal with that? Because, of course, he needs to do the best performances he can. There was obviously going to be the back in being a Chinese driver and obviously the luster of having a home race and potentially a couple of home races, which hasn't really materialised. It just feels that the opportunity has kind of gone begging for, was passed by for China to really capitalise on having an F1 driver in the sport. And now there's the possibility that this driver could be moved on because their current suitors or the future backers, Audi, would rather put someone else in that they feel would be able to deliver better results for them in the future.
Yeah, I think the Zhou situation, unfortunately, is most likely to be out of his hands. And as you've pointed, Adam, it is mainly because of the performance of the Alfa Romeo. I don't think he's going to get many opportunities to really shine. And even if Audi were to say, look, we're going to move on elsewhere, the options there aren't going to be many options available to him if he isn't able to showcase what he's capable of. It is a shame because I think we've seen He's actually quite a solid driver. As you said, it has actually been fantastic. But I don't feel that he's done enough wrong, let's say, to lose his seat in the team or F1 in general. So that would be a shame. I think with Logan Sargent, completely agree with what both of you have been saying. I think not only is it because of his own personal performances, I think it's actually because of the direction that Williams are going in now. I think Williams are getting into a position that they're building a positive trajectory. And with that, there's gonna be interest from other drivers to actually join the team. There might be some teams within the midfield that want to have a fresh start. Maybe even Sergio Perez, for example. If Sergio Perez was to choose to leave Red Bull in the next year or so, I couldn't think of anywhere better than a team at Williams, which has a really positive environment. We're seeing the good it's done for Alex Albon. Of course, they are in different phases of their careers. But I just feel that Williams would be a good team for, if they carry on the way they're going, I think they're going to become a lot more of an attractive prospect.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't rule it out, and it would be a real testament to how far Williams have come over the last few years to be able to attract someone of Perez's calibre alongside a growing in stature driver like Alex Albon at the moment. It would be an interesting story. Of course, there are other names linked as well, but interesting to see with those two in particular. The grid very much filling up very quickly. Not many seats left available, and of course a lot of pressure on the two that are currently in those seats for different reasons. Let's move on now to the predictions element of the previews. So of course, if you are new to the DNF1 F1 podcast, first of all, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and of course, if you listen to us on your favourite pod platform, leave us a 5-star review. It really does help us out a lot, so really appreciate that if you can. But for the new people on here, as part of the previews, we do our predictions for what we feel is going to go down this weekend, and we have 7 different categories that we ask ourselves, and we do our best to try and be as good or demonstrate how good a wheel knowledge that we actually have. And the first category is the best surprise. Now, this is the driver or the team that we feel is going to surprise us in the most positive manner this weekend. So, Lee, let's go to you first. Who is going to be the best surprise at the Singapore Grand Prix this weekend?
For me, I think the best surprise is going to probably be Mercedes after a bit of a disappointing... Calm down, Courtney. After a bit of a disappointing Monza, where they seem to be a bit lost compared to Ferrari and Red Bull, they're going to be heading to this weekend's a lot more of a higher downfall circuit, where they've been stronger at Zandvoort, Hungary, Silverstone this year. You expect them to come back with a strong car and a strong performance overall this weekend.
It's not a bad choice. And of course, yeah, you're right to point out with Mercedes that, Monza wasn't going to be a strong weekend for them. They did a pretty good job, all things considered. Both Hamilton and Russell, both of them in the top 6. So I don't think Mercedes could very much complain about that. I think they expected it to be much worse than that, but the two drivers doing a great job, especially George Russell managing to turn it around when he looked like he was on the back foot. So, yeah, I expect Mercedes to be much stronger this weekend. Courtney, who is going to be your best surprise?
Well, you probably guessed, given the bang on the table. I completely agree, Lee. I think that Mercedes are in for a very strong weekend. I'm going to be particularly bold, and this is where the usual suspects come for me once again. I'm going to say they're going to get a double podium.
Ooh.
That is how bold that I'm going. I feel the characteristics of this circuit are going to suit Mercedes quite well. And I also feel that both their drivers have a fire in the belly. You have a look at other drivers up and down the grid. Given the way the season's going, I feel some of them might already be thinking about where they're going for holiday this winter. But I feel that both George Russell and Lewis Hamilton have their own reasons to really put on a good performance. So yeah, I'm expecting a double podium for Mercedes this weekend.
So we're going with the bold predictions already. That is very interesting, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out. This is a circuit that's going to be very... the requirements for downforce are going to be very high. So, of course, Mercedes, this should be a circuit that they could do well at. Historically, it's never always been a circuit that Mercedes have thought they'd do well at, even though they managed to pick up a few wins. But granted, most of those came in seasons where people weren't expecting it. And then, out of nowhere, here comes Hamilton or Bottas or Rosberg, and they deliver the goods on it. George Russell needs a good weekend at Singapore. He had a dreadful one last season, so for his sake, he'll be hoping to turn that one around and hoping that Monza just wasn't a one-off and that he's got his form back together, which will be good to see. Flop of the weekend. Oh, actually, no, I haven't done best surprise for me yet. Sorry, get ahead of myself here. Fernando Alonso, and that's all I'm going to say for now. Flop of the weekend.
Ooh.
Who is flop of the weekend? I mean, street circuits are usually quite unforgiving, so I'm going to say Logie Sargent, unfortunately. I want to see him do well, but this is a driver that has been prone to crashing. Not necessarily always his fault. The car has had its issues. But even though they've taken out most of that final sector and replaced it with some straights, I still think this is a circuit that will punish you very, very easily if you get it wrong. And, you know, Logan Sargent on street circuits this season, Baku, prime example, crashed out there.
Miami.
Did he have an accident? Miami, of course. Did he have an accident at Monaco? I don't know if he did, but I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say he didn't. I might be wrong. But already, as you pointed out, Courtney, Miami, Baku, of course, street circuits have been unforgiving for Logan Sargent. And, you know, if he's pushes the car a little bit too hard and makes an error, it could do that for him again in this race. So, sorry, Logie, I'm going to have to go with you on the flop of the weekend. Courtney, who's your flop of the weekend?
Yeah, completely agree. I'm going to say Logan Sargent as well. Poor guy, I'll pick on him every single week. But I think we've seen a lot from Logan this season that he tries a little bit too hard sometimes to make an impression. And given everything we've already discussed, I feel that's going to come into play even more. So you put everything together, I'm not expecting an awful lot from him, unfortunately.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad performance in Monza. Granted, it's probably a circuit that is its own challenge, but doesn't necessarily provide the technical challenge that perhaps a few other circuits do. But Lee, in your opinion with Logan Sargent, is Courtney right? Is he just simply trying too hard?
I think he does try to overdrive the car a lot more than his teammate. I think Alex is very much a one in that car right now, and Logan is feeling the pressure and he's trying to achieve the results and he's overdriving. I think that's obviously. I think there's more going on than that, but I do think that's a big factor of the issues he's suffering this part of the season. And for me, he's my flop of the weekend as well.
Fair enough. Pole position. I'm going to go first. Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
Well,
that's not that bold at all, is it? No. But yeah.
Max.
Yeah, I mean, Max played down his chances this weekend. I mean, typical, the driver that's currently winning all the time at the moment, when they're asked a question to play down the advantage that Red Bull have. I mean, realistically speaking, even though this would be a circuit that Red Bull should be very, very strong at compared to perhaps Monza when Ferrari are really pushing them, should there be more in their comfort zone this weekend compared to last weekend?
I think talent comes into play. I think we're seeing a couple of the great drivers do this already at Singapore, and I expect Max. I think in the past, or particularly this season, I've been very vocal about Red Bull's dominance, being quite frustrating to watch. But these are the kind of circuits where Max's personal talent come into play, and I feel he's gonna do that on Saturday, 100%.
Well, this is a circuit where Sergio Perez, of course, has laid down his mark, and he won here last season. You know, he is a bit of a street circuit specialist, although we haven't seen that too much this season. I think Baku being the only one. Miami, obviously, went away from him in the race. Monaco was an absolute disaster, of course. So you can't rule Sergio Perez out. And, you know, he put together a decent performance at Monza, got, you know, the 1-2 that Red Bull had wanted. And despite the comments that were made about him, I'm pretty sure he'll be extra motivated to try and get the W this weekend. So can't rule him out either, Lee.
No, not at all. He's going to be raring to go, and he seems to be establishing a certain run of form compared to earlier in the season when he's going to be a bit hit and miss.
So, race winner. Lee, I'm going to come to you first. Who do you think is going to be the race winner this weekend? Courtney?
Max.
I'm going to go Fernando Alonso.
Ooh,
I am going to be bold, so probably hinted at that. I'm going...
I can't wait for your bold prediction.
Yeah, it's an absolute doozy, this one. No, I mean, forgive me if it sounds like I'm just pulling trying to pull a rabbit out the hat, and it's actually just some rubbish out my backside. But I don't know. I feel like you might as well go bold in this one. Aston Martin, I know they have been struggling. Maybe at a street circuit. Fernando was mighty at Monaco and was very unlucky not to get the win at that race. Of course, Max was brilliant on the day and deserved it. And Zandvoort as well. Fernando put himself in that position where he was a threat in the right circumstances. I just got this funny feeling that...
Stroll in the wall.
Well, I mean... we don't want to go down old Crashgate again, but I'm not suggesting Lance Stroll will do it on purpose. Of course not. But
he won't. Just do it.
If the right moment happens at the right time and a timely safety car comes out, you just never ever know. And Fernando benefited from this not once but twice at Singapore. You know, not necessarily just Crashgate, but what was it, 2011, 2012 in the Ferrari when a timely safety car came out, made the pit stop, and kept Sebastian Vettel behind him in a much faster Red Bull. Who's to say Fernando Alonso can't do that again in an Aston Martin? Maybe I'm just trying to convince myself here more than anybody else that this might actually happen now that I've committed myself to this prediction. But I'm going to go for it. Why not? You got to be bold. I think a lot of people listening to this are probably a bit bored of us predicting Max Verstappen as a race winner, so I'm going bold on it. I'm going to say Fernando Alonso's winning this weekend. I will probably have egg on my face, but you know what? You only live once.
I mean, that'll be a very interesting race if that prediction happens, Adam.
And let's be honest, who wouldn't want to see that? Maybe even the Max fans might want to see Fernando get a win this weekend. If there's one driver they probably would want to see win this weekend other than Max, it's probably Fernando, in fairness.
I'm sure Max Verstappen...
Well, no, I'm sure Max wouldn't want to see it, but... I mean, the Max Verstappen podcast is going on and on and on and on at the moment in the post-race driver briefings, but of course... yeah, I'd love to see it with Fernando. It would be interesting. Of course, win number 33 against the driver who used to drive number 33. The numbers are there if you line them up where you want to, so why not? Podium. Well, I'm going to go first. Max Verstappen P2. Almost as bold as my actual bold prediction. And Sergio Perez P3. Courtney, what about you?
Yeah, this is where my 2 and 1 come in. I'm going to say Max first, Lewis second, and George Russell third.
Yeah, we probably could have guessed yours, but of course we had to put the Mercedes in a particular order, of course. Lee, what about your podium?
Sergio second and Lewis third.
Fair enough. Best of the rest. Now, this is the best finisher that currently isn't driving a Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston Martin, and of course now McLaren. So I'm going to go first on this one. And I think Alpine are going to return to form, as Monza was a terrible weekend for them. I'm going to say Esteban Ocon. I think he's due a good performance. It was a bit unfortunate with the conditions in Zandvoort. The race was just a nightmare for Alpine in general. They really need to try and pull the finger out. And let's not forget, Ocon got on the podium in Monaco. So he knows his way around a street circuit. There's absolutely no reason why he's not going to put in another good performance this weekend, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I'm going to agree with you. I was going to go Ocon.
Okay, full Alpine then. I'm going to say Gasly.
Yeah, this category, I mean, obviously Alpine are not necessarily established in the front end of the grid at the moment in the same way McLaren are, by example. That's why we exclude McLaren from this particular category. But you do get that sense at the moment that in most races we're just going to be picking Alpine drivers at the moment.
Or Albon.
Or Albon, yeah. I'm surprised we haven't mentioned Alex Albon yet in these predictions at all, but I digress. So bold prediction time. So, of course, this is our very bold prediction moment. I've already had mine, as you can imagine. Courtney, you've had yours as well. So just to confirm, I predicted Fernando Alonso will win this weekend. You've predicted a double podium for Mercedes. Lee, what is your bold prediction?
My prediction is you're going to have a Red Bull fight for the win between Sergio and Max. I mean, not Max disappearing into the distance. Sergio's going to be fighting Max for the win.
Is this where we're at now?
Yeah. What's the time?
Hey, Sergio's good at street circuits.
What's the time deficit?
He's going to be raring. Do you want a time
I feel
deficit?
like you have to, because if people be saying, "Oh, Red Bull 1-2, very original." Like,
under 5 seconds.
Okay. Do you know what's going to happen, Courtney? There's going to be a late safety car, and it's going to be one under a safety car, and Perez is like 2 tenths behind Max over the line. Lee's going to be claiming that as a victory. So
Well, it meets the criteria.
That's what's
I'll
going to
take
happen
it.
now. It's all ruined. It's all ruined. We sold the dream, Courtney, and Lee's completely tarnished it now with a dose of harsh reality. But I digress. But those are our predictions, guys. Let us know if you agree, or let us know your own predictions based on those categories. I think between us, we've sacrificed a lot of potential wheel knowledge there. Whether we had any to begin with is up to you guys, of course. But we'll have to wait and see. If any of our races come true, not necessarily Lee's, but if yours and mine come true, Courtney, I'm bound they're going to be good races. So we can only hope for the best. Maybe we'll get loads of laps of crazy action, and then Lee's finish will materialise out of thin air at the very, very end. But we'll see. We'll see.
Well, that'd be an interesting race if it does.
Yeah. We can only hope. But guys, I think that's all we've got time for this episode. But as I said before, if you watch this on YouTube and you really like what we do, please like the video and consider subscribing to the channel and get involved in the conversation as well. We love hearing from you guys. I know some of you guys don't necessarily agree with us all the time, and that's absolutely fine, but we love hearing from you all nonetheless. So get in the comments, join the discussion. Of course, if you listen to us on your favourite podcasting platform, please do leave us a 5-star review. It really helps us out. And head over to the YouTube channel. Get involved in the conversation. We'd love to hear from you as well, wherever you are listening to the show around the world. But until then, guys, I think that's all we've got time for. So please do stay safe. Thanks for tuning in as always. Enjoy the Grand Prix this weekend, and we will see you for the review in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, as always, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care.
See you soon.
Goodbye.